All right, welcome in. KSO Postgame Live. I'm sure you guys are well aware of what happened at this point.
I'm not. What happened?
K-State, big fat losers to Iowa State for the third year in a row. Look, I tried to kind of poo-poo the Campbell owns Kleiman talk because, I think you could go and say, circumstances were a little weird in a lot of those games, whatever. But the excuses were gone from this game for K-State. The pandemic has been over for 5 years, so throw that out the window. There was not a lot of snow that fell on the ground at Aviva Stadium. In fact, there was zero. So, put the parkas and the shovels away. You don't need to worry about that.
There was some rain, though.
Yeah, but it went away, and also it was 7-7 when the rain had happened. So, forget about that. You can go ahead and look and say, the last 2 years, though, but K-State's Big 12 title hopes were gone before the game even kicked off. Well, not this year. You didn't have that excuse, but they might be gone now, given how you performed. So you can throw them all away. Like, K-State got beat today, and it's going to fall at the feet of Chris Kleiman and the rest of this team and coaching staff for how things went down in the 24-21 loss to Iowa State in the Air Lingus College Football Classic. I'm Mason Voth. That's Drew Galloway. As we get set to recap and discuss everything that went down here, give our immediate thoughts and answer some of your questions that you might have on the KSO YouTube. So let's just start there, Drew. Let's open it up to your instant reaction from this game.
Yeah, I think that my instant reaction is something that we talked about while we were getting everything ready, is that football is a weird game. Somebody asked in the chat while we were stuck at the Kansas City airport, what's the amount of yards that you think that K-State would need from Avery Johnson to win the game? I said anywhere between like 260, 265 total offense. Well, today he has 300. In a game where it felt like Rocco Becht played better, a lot of Avery Johnson's stats end up looking a lot better. So, and then you have that. You have, we talked at length, it felt like this last week and a half, about how, the K-State defense hasn't forced a lot of turnovers against Iowa State. They forced 2. One was a crucial one after K-State muffed the first punt of the season. Then we didn't see Dylan Edwards the rest of the day. You do that. There was just so many things that were wacky and very Farmageddon of this game. And I'm going to ask you this. Did this game feel kind of like a 2011 K-State kind of game where there were a lot of moments where the other team probably played better and looked crisper, but K-State found a way to win? Did it not feel like Iowa State kind of just did that to K-State?
Yeah, it definitely had that feel to it. K-State defensively, you felt like they dominated the first half, and they get the one touchdown and everything. So that was unfortunate. K-State couldn't capitalize on the opportunities that were there, but they had more yards. Like, for most of the game, they were pacing well ahead of Iowa State in the yardage category. They ended up the game with 70 more yards. At most points of the game, they had over 100 more yards than Iowa State had gained. But as we know, K-State's turnovers came at some really bad points. They didn't take advantage of it. They were bad on the conversion downs, and we'll get into some of that as this game goes on. But I talked about this yesterday when I went on the radio with Alec Bussey in Des Moines, and I said, I don't even think that Rocco Becht and Avery Johnson were all that different from each other last year in terms of the actual production and the numbers and how it looks. But you can go and look at what Iowa State did last season and the games they won, and you can go down the list, and so many of them you can point to and say they won that game because of Rocco Becht. They won that game because of Rocco Becht, and they got that one because of him. Even in games where he didn't perform his best, you didn't feel like, certainly he didn't give it to the other team. And I think that would be the thing to take away from today, is that neither quarterback gave the game away, and Rocco Becht didn't play well for a lot of the game in terms of, his completion percentage and all that. But you're right. At the end of the day, like, the offense got pretty surgical for Iowa State when they needed it most. And I think this is pretty glaring to me. And I think everybody's going to want to blame the offense in this because it's easy to throw it all on Avery Johnson because of what the expectations should have been. You want to be able to say, oh, this is supposed to be the best wide receiver room under Kleiman and all that. We'll talk about that in a little bit because I actually think that that's misguided frustration from today's game. But Iowa State, on their final 4 offensive drives of the game, the Cyclones total 214 yards. That's just under 92% of the total available yards to them. So essentially what that means, I'm sure most of you can understand, but to explain, if your drive starts at the 25-yard line, you have 75 available yards to get. So if you get all 75, you get 100% of them. If, 75 yards, whatever, you get like 37 yards, you're just under 50% of the yards that were available to you there. On those final 4 drives, Iowa State totaled just under 92%. They scored 17 points, and they used almost 18 minutes of clock. And not to mention, that should really be 216 yards and over 92% and 24 points because they took a knee at the 1-yard line, multiple knees at the 1-yard line to ice the game. K-State's defense didn't step up when they needed to. And I go back to, it's weird Chris Kleiman didn't talk about it today, but after the Oklahoma State loss in 2023, he still kind of put that game on the defense, despite the fact that they always seem to be put in like really tough field position situations, and they held Oklahoma State to a lot of field goals. But then they went and made the comment about like, well, the defense couldn't stuff. Today would be the day to make those comments because the defense was really good in the first half, but it was also pouring rain. So I think you would blame more of it on that, knowing what we know after seeing the second half. And while the offense missed some opportunities, we'll get into that as well. They did enough in a sloppy weather type of game to win it. I mean, Iowa State only scored 24 points. Through a majority of the game, Iowa State had only scored 7 points. K-State's offense was moving the ball enough. Now, they didn't convert in some really important situations, but at some point, the defense needed to make a play. The defense made 0 plays in the second half because the best defense for K-State was just realizing, oh, thank goodness, Rocco Beck threw one outside the reach of his receiver. Or, he just got stopped just short on kind of a scramble. I would put more of this on the defense and the fact that, the secondary that was a question mark, they got abused for most of the game. And then we saw the run game start to open up a little bit more for Iowa State when it, was going to ultimately be pretty important that you stop the run because that's how you kill time. That's how you stay balanced and move the ball. And that would be another difference in this game. K-State was not able to run the ball again. So the 2 things that I was probably most worried about entering the season for K-State on both sides of the ball, the corners didn't think they had a good day. Donovan McIntosh dropped what would have been a pretty crucial pick. Like, it hit him. He should have had it. And then the offensive line, once again, after revamping it and knowing it was a problem from last year, could get 0 push in bad weather where throwing the ball was not a viable option in the first half, and they couldn't do anything. If you look at it, K-State, if you take out the Jace Brown little trick play where they run the option, which it was like straight out of Andy Kotelnicki's playbook from the 23 K-State KU game when they used Torrey Laughlin a lot back there like that. 3.24 yards per attempt from the guys that are your actual runners of the football. So your running backs and Avery Johnson. That just can't happen. And Iowa State picked up their run game in the second half and then obviously made it easier to throw the ball. But a disappointing debut for the new look secondary, specifically the corners, because they got beat over the top. They didn't really make any plays when the ball was in the air, and Iowa State was able to beat them over the top. And then also, there just seemed to be little resistance down the stretch when you needed it, when they were comfortable getting, okay, we'll take a couple of yards here underneath, and they just kept moving the ball. They had a lot of 3rd and 4th and short situations late in the game that they were able to pick up and convert, because that's going to be a big part of this story. K-State was better on 3rd down today, 5 of 13. Iowa State was 3 of 14. Some people might be surprised by that. But on 4th down, and keep in mind, K-State had to do this partly because of situation, also partly because of the kicking situation. I don't think you're going to put Luis Rodriguez in a 55-yard field goal spot in his first game in Ireland with a wet field. Iowa State was 3 of 3 on 4th down, including a couple there towards the end that helped decide the game. But I think, to me, that stat right there is the most glaring one. The way K-State allowed Iowa State to close out the game on offense, where they milk over half of the minutes available clockwise in the second half. They take 92% of the yards that they could have had. They score 17, should have been 24 points. And that's what the difference in this game was to me. We'll talk about the shortcomings of the offense and some of the issues in places, because that's important too. And that's a real thing to be weary of. But I come away from this game putting more of it on the defense, not doing anything in the second half, than the offense, because it was even when the rain and the weather was terrible in the first half. When the second half came around, Iowa State was able to make the plays happen on offense, and their defense got enough stops. Like, Iowa State's defense wasn't perfect. Like, they got torched on big plays in the second half when K-State needed them, but they at least came through on a couple of crucial small yardage plays. K-State wasn't able to do that.
I think that the thing that I'll say, I don't necessarily agree totally with how you said that the corners played. I thought they were fine. I mean, Rocco Becht was only completed 50% of his passes. Donovan McIntosh and Zayshawn Rich both had 3 pass breakups. Probably got to make that play on the interception. But from my view of how we saw it kind of looked like, in a way, that Quay Moss kind of got in the way and ended up maybe even deflecting the ball that ends up hitting McIntosh. So I'm kind of a little bit torn about that. I do think the offensive line was bad. The offensive line needs to get better. And it was something that Tim Fitzgerald actually said, and we heard when he was talking about his daily delivery. Avery Johnson gets sacked one time, and you kind of see that as like a one-off, as like, okay, like that's probably pretty good. But then like the amount of times that it felt like Avery was under pressure, or, you know, there was a couple plays. One led to an intentional grounding that I think was a little bit questionable. Was, you know, Sam Hecht, number one, had a really bad snap on a play, and then number two didn't block. So you can't have that happen at a crucial moment. The defense, though, in the second half just completely fell apart. I mean, Iowa State couldn't get anything going in that first half. And then the thing that really kind of gets me is, you know, Iowa State, not a great running team. We've talked about that again at length over the last however long leading up to this game, that 23-24, not great running teams, but ran pretty well against K-State. Iowa State had 23 rushing yards in the first half. They had 75 in just the fourth quarter alone, I believe, if you take away the kneel downs. So that was pretty disappointing. There were times that the offense looked like it was really coming to life. There were times where the defense looked like it was trying to figure it out. I think that the two things that really lost this game for K-State, number one, you pointed out, the last 4 offensive drives that Iowa State had. You cannot have that huge play to Jaron Bradley to make it a 3-point game and then never get the ball back when you had 6:43 to go. Like, you have to find a way to get your offense back onto the field.
And timeouts available.
Yeah, and 3 timeouts plus the 2-minute timeout. So they had 4 stoppages of the clock and couldn't get the ball back because the defense was struggling that bad. And then the second thing that loses the game for K-State had, I think, 8 drives that ended in Iowa State territory and 4 that they did not score on. Like, that can't happen. Joe Jackson break big run, fumbles. You go for it on 4th and 1 from the 7-yard line. I love that call. In a game like this, we saw Iowa State's kicker, who traditionally is really solid, miss one from 48 yards that wasn't even close because of the footing. You saw Luis Rodriguez, I think it was the second extra point, almost slipped when he went to kick it. The footing was not great for kicking today. So I like going for it. It's 4th and 1. You got to, as Chris Kleiman would say, you got to nut up and get that first down. And then on 4th and 1 in your own territory, I don't love going for it necessarily, but I think that Chris Kleiman saw what we all saw. The defense couldn't stop anybody.
Well, and to that point, you're thinking, okay, they're at the 30-yard line. They have to get to the 31 on it. Number one, I think K-State should be better in short yardage the last 2 seasons, given the personnel they have. You have Avery Johnson, who can run the football as well as some teams' running backs can do. You got to find a way to be better there. Obviously, he didn't get much help blocking on the play, but you've got to find a way to do that. And you know, I'm not the offensive coordinator, so I'm not the one that needs to be deciding on if that was the right type of play to try and run in that situation. I think if you've got a quarterback that can run like that, you probably need to try to set yourself up in a situation where he at least has the choice. Okay, do I throw the ball, or if I see it quickly, I just shoot it and run? We've talked so much this summer watching KSO Classic. Oh my gosh, Michael Bishop, he saw the hole instantly, and he didn't care if maybe he could throw it for 35 yards in the next 5 seconds. He saw that he could get 10, or even on a situation like that, 5 yards immediately, and he just took it and did it. And we didn't see that today. And that's something that I thought should come with the development of Avery Johnson. The other thing that I would say in this, you're at the 30-yard line. Defense is, was getting ready to not be very good in this stretch. They were in the middle of that commencing. K-State also was not good on special teams again today. Simon McClendon averaged just over 36 yards per punt. That's not going to do it. Do you realize, given the circumstances of where K-State set up on a lot of their drives, when K-State had to punt today, K-State punted and gave the ball to Iowa State in not the most advantageous of situations. K-State would give the ball, like if Iowa State started at the punt was from the 10-yard line, Iowa State's still in their side on the K-State side of the field. If you're at the 25, okay, they're just past midfield in their own territory. If they're at the 30, same type of deal. Like you're not gaining an overwhelming advantage there. And you look at the personnel, you have Avery Johnson, you think we should be able to get this. You couldn't trust your punter. You couldn't trust your kicker. Now, part of that is weather conditions, but like in this game today, it would have been ill-advised for K-State to send Luis Rodriguez out there for a 55-yard field goal when he's never kicked on this stage before. When you go and look, I would say like the example would be that second turnover on downs that K-State had. It was in the third quarter, 7 minutes left. K-State has to punt the ball from the Iowa State 33-yard line. That's just you can't have that. Like you would like to be able to kick field goal, but you had to do it in that situation. You just couldn't trust it. Then they also muffed the punt, which fortunately for them, I don't know what Taylor Mauser was thinking at the start of that game, where he ends up just flipping the ball around and like, why are you pitching in the rain like that? But yeah, no, I absolutely think that I agree with the decision to go for it. It sucks. It feels weird, but they should have stepped up and done something there, and they didn't. And those are the spots where you can criticize the offense today, is that they made some of the big plays that mattered. The bomb to Jaron Bradley, the bomb to Jace Brown, they were all there. Unfortunately, you didn't make the big little plays when you needed to, and that ends up being the difference in the game because that's how Iowa State won.
And some of that is just being more physical. Like it's 3rd and 1. You got it, or 4th and 1, and some of the 4th and 1, I think both 4th and 1s, it was more like 4th and half a foot than a full 1. Like that is just being physical. And then again, you point out special teams; they were a disaster. I mean, to be honest, the punting was terrible. The kick returns, Bryce Nornberg had one big one, but also had 2 really bad ones. Then Luis Rodriguez did his job. He went out there 3 times, kicked it through the uprights 3 times. He did his job. Dylan Edwards muffed a punt on the first play of the season for him, and then we never saw him again. Sterling Lockett didn't even attempt to return a punt. I would imagine that was probably something that he was told to go out there and you're just going to catch the ball, because it was deceptively wet out there. So, that was part of the issue, I think, with the punt returns. But we've also talked about a lot this season that K-State needs to get better at like the hidden yardage. Some of that is, just getting yards and then punting. Some of it is if your offense doesn't do the right job. If you're the punter, unload on one. That is your time to do it, because you have to pick the offense up. It is such a team game. And when your punter is also not really playing well and your offense is sputtering and your defense isn't playing well, it leads to games that end up like this, where it just feels like K-State couldn't get out of their own way and beat themselves.
Well, and to that point, like early on, ultimately the end of the game, the hidden yardage doesn't seem to be that big of a deal because I think Iowa State's average start ended up being at their own 37. K-State's ended up being at their own 30. But if you use your eyeballs, you can understand where the difference in this comes because muffing that punt early set K-State behind the 8 ball with their yardage. And so then you go out, you give the ball to them instantly because, of the muff punt. And Iowa State really gets kind of, they get a boost from it because of where they end up at the K-State 7 there. And you get fortunate because that was a place where the starting field position was good. And then you go throughout the rest of the game and realize that you just weren't able to get anything in those punts. Like that's such a big deal to not be able to get things turned around with the yardage. And they never were. And that's why they spent most of the first half trying to play catch up there. And again, I put some blame on like the running game needed to be better because of the offensive line and everything. But also like it's a little bit easier for defenses to sell out to do something when you have so much field available. And certainly in those conditions, you knew K-State wasn't going to throw the ball. Like Iowa State tried throwing the ball in the first half, and it didn't work out very well for them. If you go look at the first half passing numbers, Iowa State was 6 of 15 throwing the football. K-State was 9 of 14. They were a little more efficient. They were a little bit more smart about when they did it. K-State just struggled running the ball early when they needed to kind of get themselves out of the mud. And you don't want to throw the ball that close to Iowa State's into the spot that they're going to score in because we saw what happened last year against Houston in similar conditions. Even if you have total faith in your quarterback, because up until the disaster in the second half of Houston, I thought Avery Johnson over the last 3 or 4 games was the best he had ever thrown the ball. And unfortunately, the wet weather, that can impact things for you. So they just were in a tough spot, and the areas that needed to pick them up didn't. They got fortunate that Iowa State missed a field goal, that Iowa State themselves forced a fumble. Like it wasn't K-State that forced that fumble there. It was a terrible play call in the pouring rain that led to it. And so you just a lot of areas today where it was the little things that K-State didn't do. And this has been a thing over now the last handful of seasons where K-State is not the team anymore that doesn't beat themselves because we talk so much. I think K-State has had talented enough teams over the last 3 seasons that the only reason that they're going to lose a game is because of something they do. They're more talented than these other teams. They should be better. They haven't done it. So I think today, if you're looking to be mad at anybody, I get it. You want to put it on the players because they play the games, but Nate Katzer continues to be an absolute disaster. And again, maybe you say, well, look, the players have to do something. Maybe his schemes are great. I don't care. You got to get something out of these guys eventually because it's a results-based business, and the results that we've seen from Nate Katzer have been mighty underwhelming since he took over. Joe Klanderman, I think he's pretty good at what he does. He showed it in 2022, but Joe Klanderman and his defense lost the game for K-State today. I already said that I thought the corners probably lapsed in some of their spots. Maybe they could have gotten help elsewhere. Van Malone has to step up, though, because guess what? One half of the field last year with corners was an absolute disaster with Keenan Garber, who's coming back for another year, and they couldn't find anybody else to fill in there. Then you go look at the offense. First game for Brian Lepak as the offensive line coach. I think knowing what we know based off of last year, it's a little unfair to the offensive line because a guy that you thought was going to be your starting left tackle and your best offensive lineman is not here for a non-football related medical issue. But they probably had the worst day out of any position on the field because they couldn't do anything to help spring this running attack and weather that called for it once again. So you can go just kind of down the row right now of a bunch of these positions where, yeah, players didn't execute in some spots, but I can name you coach after coach that I don't think did their job today. And after seeing it for year after year, where it seems like K-State's making it a lot harder on themselves, you have to start blaming those guys because the players are changing. The coaches have not, and they continue to be a problem. So this is not they need to be gone yesterday type of deal, but they do need to start getting a little bit better and finding some way to address these problems. And if they don't, then Chris Kleiman once again has to have the conversation at the end of the year, like he did with Courtney Messingham after 2021. Okay, are things getting stale? Is there a place where we can improve here? We have to find somebody that can do it. He did it. He got Colin Klein in. They won a Big 12 championship. The problem is the season's already begun. You can't make a shift like that now. The guys you have as coaches right now have to get better immediately because I said it yesterday. Well, today you heard it today, but I recorded it yesterday on PowerCat Game Day. The expectation for this season, if K-State isn't even playing in Arlington, it's a failure of a season. They could go 9-3, absolute failure. This team, in the position that they're in now, with the guys they've brought in, how long the program has had time to kind of rebuild after you lost a lot of those key pieces from the Big 12 title team, they should be back in that position. And what we saw today, once again, was a team that wasn't able to get there, because you said this kind of reminds you of a 2011 type of win for Iowa State. This reminded me of a 2021 K-State team where, yeah, they're good. They're going to be fine. They're going to really just demolish the bad teams. They're going to give themselves an opportunity in a lot of games. But I can remember talking on the radio with Stan Weber the weekend after the Texas game. And he's talking about like, oh, well, I guess it wasn't the Texas game. I think it was the Iowa State game that season, because his tone changed after the Texas game. And I said, I understand, like, hard to win games, as Chris Kleiman says. And I don't think you should, go back to what he said last year and everything. But it's also difficult to win 10 games in a season. And that's what K-State needs to do to be in position. But that 2021 team, they weren't ever getting over the hump and beating teams that were better than them on a consistent basis, or even teams that were even with them. And it wasn't until after the disaster in Austin where I think, Stan's attitude kind of changed. And I'm seeing that with this team right now, where they have been playing teams that are on even footing with them, and for some reason, they're always getting the better of them. Arizona State last year, same type of deal. Arizona State didn't win that game. You shut down Cam Scatterboot, the best player in the Big 12 last season. Didn't matter. Iowa State last season, you were right there, but you made the catastrophic errors in that game to let Iowa State beat you. And you can just, BYU, same type of deal. BYU did nothing spectacular in that game against K-State. K-State gave that game away. And you go back to 2021 and look, and K-State just let Oklahoma State and Baylor and Texas outplay them those seasons. That is what has to absolutely change right now. Is you got to find a way to quit being like 2021 K-State and make the adjustments to where you're ready. And again, to just tie it all together. That's tougher to do because you're not going to change the voices that are in these players' heads. So these coaches have to make some of their own changes before you keep going on with what you've done the last 3 seasons, because it's not working anymore in a way that can make K-State successful to the level that they need to be.
Yeah, I agree with that. The other noteworthy thing that I think has kind of gone a little bit under the radar, I thought the receivers were actually pretty solid today. They had some drops, but I think that this was a fine first step because you saw somebody other than Jace Brown go out and really make an explosive play in case they really needed it when J.B. Bradley had the 65-yard catch. I don't know if I would have said that J.B. Bradley would have had a game with 75 yards before the season started. So to get a game one, I think impressive. I thought that Garrett Oakley looked great during the game, especially after the catch. I thought that he was very good. But yeah, I mean, overall, this ends up being obviously one of the more frustrating losses, I think, that K-State's had in the climate era, because K-State did so many things that I think were pretty good to above average, and then just one catastrophic failure. The Joe Jackson fumble, you turn the ball over on downs at the 7-yard line on a 4th and 1 play that you got just demolished at the line of scrimmage on. There is going to be a little bit of what do you do next standpoint. I think what you do from here on is, you heard the players and Chris Kleiman talk a lot after the game about that there is 11 games left. There is 11 games left, but the caveat, and again, it's something that we've talked about and stressed about the entire offseason, is you lose this game, your margin for error is so slim. So now K-State has to really rattle off some games here. And in a Big 12 where I don't think that there's a dominant team that's going to go 9-0, but there's going to be a lot of teams that I think are 7-2, 6-3 in the league, and to already not have a tiebreaker over Iowa State, it really hurts. And I think that's going to be kind of the lingering effect of this game more than anything else. I see that there's a lot of people that just want to burn it all down in the comments. I'm not totally there. There's a comment from Carping Tim seemed like a lot of balls that should have been caught today. Yes, this is where it's weird because there has been a lot of Avery Johnson discourse about how he played and how K-State's offense looked. He ends 21 of 30 for 273 yards. 4 of the 9 incompletions that Avery had today were dropped. That's something that needs to still get better. Iowa State had a bunch of drops today too. The ball, nobody looked comfortable when they had the ball in their hands for a lot of that first half. Like, I think that's just, it comes down to, it was not a great game weather-wise. I see some people that are still melting down a little bit here. Oh, I see one. Klein had nothing to do with the Big 12 championship. Yes, he did. He was the offensive coordinator. That offense was very good. Especially, there were times like the Tulane game where the offense was bad. The 22 offense was one of the best in K-State history in a lot of different categories, or near the top 5. He had a lot to do with it. Should Dylan Edwards have called fair catch on the punt that he muffed? I think he was trying to. Like, I think that he was legitimately trying to, and still muffed it anyway. Let's see. I'm trying to find another one here. Avery, I don't think got worse. He had moments where it wasn't great, but in the game, he ends with 273 yards passing and 21 yards rushing. So he has 300 yards of offense, and people are still thinking that he didn't play great. So I think that some of that is just the high standard that Avery is held to, but I think that you will take this game 10 times out of 10 from what you got with Avery.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we talked about it beforehand, but we were just, we discussed, like, I don't think K-State should ever lose a game where Avery Johnson throws for 270 yards, especially with as efficient as he was today. I mean, he went out there and completed 70% of his passes, and we talked no interceptions either, no turnovers from Avery Johnson today. We talked all offseason. What are some of the marks that Avery Johnson needs to hit to, have improvement of what we think of him as a passer this year? We said, okay, he needs to throw for 3,000 yards. He needs to throw for 30 touchdowns. He needs to get his completion percentage to at least 60%. Well, he got to 70% today. He played really well when it came to throwing the ball. Those 4 drops you talked about, drops are going to happen, but there were 4 of them today. He only had 9 incompletions. He would have been 25 for 30, probably over 300 yards. And not to mention one of those drops that I think was the worst of the day, because sometimes drops, they can be calculated a little weird, because it's like, okay, did a guy actually drop it, or was like it good defense too? One of the 4th down incompletions that happened, it should have been caught. Like, that again changes the way that you think about him. The 3,000 yards that we talked about being the target goal, he threw for 273 today. He's not going to do that in every single game, but to get off and do that against a team that has a pretty good secondary in Iowa State, he's well on his way to doing that this season. And so that's where we can dive a little bit more into the Avery Johnson and wide receiver conversation, because immediately you just see people wanting to go after the receivers. Oh, it's supposed to be the best receiver room under Chris Klieman, blah, 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 all that. All right. In the last 2 seasons for K-State, there have only been 3 such games where at least 2 wide receivers have caught at least 75 yards in the game. The one instance last year, oddly enough, was the Houston game when Jace Brown and Keegan Johnson did it pretty much the entire first half. And you think about it, K-State wasted one of those drives because Jace Brown got hit in the back of the end zone. Instead, he ran out of bounds. And then it happened twice in the 2023 season at Texas, which was kind of a weird game, and then Troy, which, whatever. So it's something that had only happened 3 times over the last 2 seasons. You go out and do it in game 1 against a team that has one of the best corners in the Big 12. And like you said earlier, I don't know that I ever expected to get a 75-yard game out of Jaron Bradley this season. And then you can go and look and say, okay, Jerron Tibbs also had 35 yards in this game. And then Jace Brown did exactly what you'd expect Jace Brown to go out and do, where 78 yards, 4 catches, a touchdown, and he, the yards per catch, he's one of the best in the Big 12 when it comes to that. So I get why you would be a little underwhelmed, but this was not really the game for the receivers to go out and put on a show. This is not, October 4th or whatever at Baylor when the weather is going to be dry. You're going to be on a clean surface, and you should have no excuses to not throw the ball around. This was a game where it was wet. It was a little tough to take care of the ball. You couldn't really throw in the first half. It would be ill-advised to do it downfield or like they did later in the game.
There's also been some discourse just all over the place about the touchdowns that he threw, saying that he was underthrowing the guys. If a player is wide open, would you rather underthrow him or overthrow him, Mason? I would much rather underthrow him because you know that he's going to be there and catch the ball.
The people talking about the underthrow on the ball to Jace Brown, you want him to lead his receiver when he's that wide open, and just like, if he leads the receiver in that spot, there's a greater chance that Jace drops it or catches it in the back of the end zone out of bounds, as opposed to what he did like that. That's not a problem at all. And he had some throws that I thought were crisper today, like the little slant that he hit Jace on that went for 17 yards after a penalty by the offensive line, set you behind the 8 ball deep in Iowa State territory. I thought that was big. We talked about the 4th down earlier that was dropped. Like, he put the throw where it needed to be. Was he perfect today? No. Could he have run a little bit better at times? Maybe. It's tough to say without going back to look at it. I also know that there's going to be some discourse on, did he get the first down? Did he not on that 4th down run? And I already said it earlier. I think he needs to be more convictive when he decides to run the ball. He has to make that decision quicker, and he has to commit to it 100%. I think there was still a problem with that today. But Avery Johnson's so low on this list of why this game was lost today. A lot of the other pieces failed. And yes, is it disappointing? Absolutely. Because like we just talked about, he outplayed Rocco Becht this evening. Unfortunately, that's not how people are going to see it all around college football, locally, regionally, nationally. They're going to come out of this going, oh, Rocco Becht once again outduels Avery Johnson, when last 2 times they've played, the only 2 times that Avery Johnson has been on the field with Rocco Becht, Avery Johnson's been the better quarterback. But Rocco Becht has done the things that were needed to win. And that's where this also gets unfortunate, is because Avery Johnson did everything he could to have the opportunity to go out and do that. Over the last 6 some minutes of the game, his defense, with all 3 timeouts and the 2-minute timeout, couldn't get the ball back for him to even give him that opportunity. And that is the issue, where Avery Johnson, he kind of gets an incomplete grade from me today, because as much as it would have been nerve-inducing for him to go out there and have to be in that position, we needed to see it. And we didn't get to see it today because he was never afforded that opportunity. So I'm not saying that you have to treat Avery Johnson with kid gloves and that he couldn't have been better today. He could have. There were moments where he could have stepped up. But, I mean, if I had to rank the positions on earlier in the offseason on where I thought they stood, I mean, if you're ranking quarterback today for K-State, who played better than Avery Johnson as a position group? Yeah, I mean, I think you look at it and just like, he did what he needed to do in that situation. But I don't know. We'll see how it goes from there. And I don't know. I'm not here. We'll close it out with the big picture talk, because number one, if you want to be mad about this loss, you absolutely should be. I mean, they gave up a home game to come over here and play Iowa State. And if Drew's computer dies, RIP, we'll see him later. They gave up the home game to come over here and play with Iowa State. Whether it is right or wrong, K-State couldn't lose this game because it's going to look bad for Gene Taylor. And it's, this stuff gets planned out in advance, but when they planned this, you had Avery Johnson on your roster. You knew what this season was going to mean for K-State football, and you absolutely had to come out and win this because of the way the season sets up. But like, now you've set yourself back with not only the stuff you talked about, you're 0-1 in Big 12 play, you only have 8 games left, but also, like, the margin for error is gone. You lose the tiebreaker to Iowa State, who definitely looks like a team that could factor in to being one of those teams that's tied at 7-2, because that seems like that's going to be the target now to get to Arlington in the new Big 12. Like, this is a whole athletic department loss that they have to wear today that gets embarrassing for them. Gene Taylor and the athletic department making that decision of come play this game, K-State's coaches, because we talked about their deficiencies, the players that didn't make plays, all facets of this were a bad situation for K-State, and you're allowed to be mad about how that played out. Now, why was it Iowa State? Look, we know why K-State made this decision. They are getting a nice payday for it, better than what they would have gotten to make out of a home game day. I can guarantee you that. There's no reason to play this game if you're not going to make more money from it than what you would make bringing fans into Manhattan, Kansas for the game. But you had to find a compelling opponent for this game because you're K-State. Look, as much as we want to say the Big Ten and the SEC stuff, it's annoying that they're on this pedestal. They've earned it, and they're there. There are certain programs that, like Notre Dame, for example, can come over here as a one-off. They can bring all the fans, so they can play Navy. Florida State, they can come as a one-off. They can bring all the fans. They can play Georgia Tech, who probably has some pretty rich fans that could also make the trip too. When you get two Big 12 schools, you have to find two sides to draw. Well, look at K-State's schedule this year. There aren't a lot of home games on there. They wanted K-State to be involved in this game. The Air Lingus organizers did. But who are you going to bring over here off of K-State's home schedule? Well, it's not going to be any of the non-conference games because they're not going to bring anybody over with them. You go and look and you say, well, it's not going to be UCF because I don't even know if UCF has football fans. Maybe they just cram all their students into the bounce house. They're certainly not going to come over here for that. So you can keep kind of going down the list and say, like, we think it's a pretty lame home schedule for K-State this season. TCU, TCU is coming next year. But who are they playing?
Bill Belichick.
Yeah, Bill Belichick in North Carolina. So there's your draw right there. Texas Tech, maybe you could have made that case, but like when this was getting planned, Texas Tech would not have been a team that factored into that. Same for TCU. And then Colorado, which, despite the Deion Sanders stuff, like the Colorado thing, I don't know that you can buy into. And again, Deion Sanders just finished up his second year. When this stuff was in the planning process, Colorado was a 3-9, 4-8 team that you didn't know if they were going to be legit. And we saw it last year. I don't know if they really have fans. They have influencers that show up in Boulder occasionally. So that's where I go to, I get why it had to be Iowa State, but it's just unfortunate the way it played out. And that's why you absolutely had to win today. And it's going to look bad on everybody. And the last thing on why it's so catastrophic, this is really the biggest reason, is now you look at K-State's schedule and you go, okay, North Dakota, it doesn't matter what you do there. Nobody cares. Army, doesn't matter what you do. Nobody cares. Arizona, doesn't matter. They're going to be bad. UCF, doesn't matter. They're going to be bad. You have to wait until October 4th, until they go on the road to Baylor, to maybe have a game that can get the fans back fully engaged and on your side. And even then, there's a chance, we've already talked about it with Baylor's schedule, that they could be going into that game 2-3. They could lose to Auburn in week 1. They could lose to SMU in week 2. They could lose to Arizona State in week 4. And then they'll beat Oklahoma State. They'll beat Samford. Then it's K-State. Like that, there's no guarantee that game means anything. So then you come home against TCU. They're in the same kind of boat. But if you string together back-to-back good wins there, okay, you probably have people, they're fired up for that game at Kansas. But it's going to take a while to put yourself in a position where everybody's excited about K-State football again, because the excitement is gone, the benefit of the doubt is gone, and it's not going to be a fun next month because none of it matters until you play somebody that's good again and you failed your first test this season.
Yeah, I think that is kind of the biggest killer of this game, is that a lot of the hype has instantly evaporated and kind of gone away. So now it is just, you got to figure out a way to just get some games and start winning, and to really do that. And the Baylor game that we've had scheduled again, we're going to see where that kind of goes because of what their schedule looks like. I think that TCU game might end up being a pretty big one, just from what they have beforehand, before they play K-State. But that is probably where K-State's at right now. Is you probably need to win 4 or 5 in a row for everybody to really be fully bought in. And you won't totally wash away this game, but it will be far enough away that people will kind of give you a little bit more grace going forward. But the biggest thing, I think, and it's not even the getting people bought in, because I'm not super worried about people getting bought in again. It is just that how razor thin that margin for error is now. And, a game that is on the schedule that I don't think I know a single K-State media people picked K-State to win is the game at Utah. And like knowing that you have that game where going into the year, that was like the one game that it looked like K-State was probably going to be an underdog for. Now, I don't know if you really have that luxury to lose that game, because the way that college football works in 2025, if you are not the elite of the elite, it is so hard for you to rattle off 10 or 11 games in a row. This is where it gets tough, because to make it to the Big 12 championship game, K-State's going to have to win probably 6 or 7 conference games in a row. And that's just a fact at this point. So rough loss. You can probably tell how bad that I'm wearing it on the show. I haven't exactly had a great time doing this, but it's what we do. Sometimes you can tell when Mason and I are really upset about a loss, and I think today is one of those days. This is kind of where we're at right now. Is just, you gotta roll North Dakota, roll Army, roll Arizona, get to that first bye week, and kind of take a step back and hope that you're 3-1 and getting ready for Big 12 play again, and start kind of what would be deemed, as I can already see it right now, that's going to be called like a new season when Big 12 play rolls around again. So you got to be 3-1 going into that, or really none of this really matters.
Yeah, well, you talk about wearing it. Yeah, my frustration from today, like, I try to explain this to people all the time. I went to K-State, grew up a K-State fan. Like, I still want to see them win for my personal experience. But there's the professional side of this where I think I can be objective with how I evaluate this team. And even then you may say, I don't know about that, but I think I do better than some in this industry. But it sucks to do our job when this team loses. Like, I'm going to spend how many hours away from my family to get on 2 uncomfortable flights, and we spent forever in the airport, and now we have to deal with the fallout of this, because it's not fun to cover a team that's not playing well. It's not been fun to cover K-State basketball the last 2 seasons. It's not fun to have to go all this way and cover a loss, and have to, in the message board industry, it's not enjoyable to have to, like, loss is bad today. They don't deserve credit or anything, like, no patience for them. I get that. But also, you don't have to go overboard and crazy about it. And we have to, watch that sometimes. Like, so there's both ends of this. Like, it's not fun. So yeah, like, we're wearing it today. There's the personal and the professional side, all of it mixed in together. Also, I mean, I was wearing it beforehand. I threw up before the game. I don't think I'd thrown up in like over a decade. But I had not drinking much water.
And not from alcohol, by the way.
Yeah, that's the other thing people should know. You're like, oh, well, I haven't had a single sip of alcohol since I've been here. I also haven't really had a sip of much. I had a bottle of water on the plane, a Coke, and then a little bit of tap water since I've been here, and that's it. And so I was very dehydrated this morning.
Liquids are very hard to come by in Ireland for whatever reason.
They are, for some reason. I threw up like 4 times this morning before we got to the stadium, but I threw up. I felt better until, late fourth quarter. And then it was like, oh, this defense makes me want to throw up. So, I'm glad I'm feeling better now, but it's hard not to overreact to this loss, because it's the first one, because it's also the first Big 12 game, because what's at stake, and where the problems were last year, and they didn't seem to get better yet. Like, I think Avery Johnson got better, but we tried saying this all offseason to people, where Avery Johnson was going to get better, was going to be fairly marginal for this team's success. Where the difference could have been was if K-State had gotten the ball back for that final possession like they needed. The defense couldn't hand it over. So again, you let another team's wide receivers and tight ends make the plays to close out the game down the stretch. The offensive line, which was a problem in November, they were a problem in game number 1. And that's why this game in itself, you couldn't have predicted necessarily where the personnel was going to be, but it's a little unfair. I'll give them this benefit of the doubt. It's a little unfair to put this kind of game on a pretty much reworked offensive line, where Sam Hecht is really the only legitimate returning player. Taylor Poitier comes back as a starter too, but he committed one of the bad penalties in the game. I have some questions about Taylor Poitier and where he stands, and I don't know that he'd be getting as many snaps if George Fitzpatrick wasn't injured and you were trying to bring some other guys into the mix. So, like, the problems that were your biggest issues last year, even though some people wanted to chalk it up to Avery Johnson, they were still your problems today. And that's not going to inspire confidence moving forward. And you're not going to get a true answer or some way to feel better about it to, like we said, until you go to Waco in October. And even then, it might take longer. But what do? Show up next week. You expect K-State to move on and be fine throughout the next couple of weeks. They have to take care of their business. They have to make a statement next week. They've started a little slow the last 2 years against their FCS. Well, really the last 3. I mean, they weren't great against South Dakota in 2022 until you talk about nutting up. Chris Kleiman kind of had to get on Adrian Martinez and that team to say, let's go. And they figured it out. It's unfortunate that in 2025, your wake-up call has to come game 1 against a conference opponent, whereas, 2022, you got the luxury of it being against Tulane, a team that won the Cotton Bowl that season, and it didn't count to your Big 12 record. But I don't know. We'll see how next week looks. There may not be much we can glean from it, but if they go out there and they score, 56 points or whatever, and they do it pretty effortlessly, and Avery Johnson doesn't have to play half of the second half, that's a good start. But Army might test your offensive line a little bit more, and then we'll see what Arizona looks like. But I don't know. All I know is that we will be continuing to cover it, win, lose, Ireland, Manhattan, Tucson, wherever the game's being played. KSO will be there this season. As disappointing as the post-game live may be, we'll have it and everything that you want to talk about there. We'll do a better job next week of answering some of the questions. There was just a lot to kind of flesh out from this game that I thought was important to get to. So I appreciate everybody that watched live and added their commentary. Please keep doing that. We'll be better about it next week and as the season moves on getting to it. And we'll get out of Aviva Stadium for now. The Aviva, as they've called it around here. I guess, that's just like an international thing when you have these big stadiums, you just refer to it as that, like the Azteca. That's the one that always comes to my mind. So we'll get out of here. We'll have some more wrap-up stuff over on KSO throughout the next couple of hours and days at On 3. And then how are we going to do a Sunday show this week, Drew?
I actually have no idea. That you're about to tell me for the first time, because you guys are on a plane.
You know what? Here, Drew's not going to be on the Sunday show this week because he gets to stay in Ireland an extra day, have some fun. I want you to decompress. I want you to put this loss behind you. You got 24 hours to flush it and move on to week 1, Drew. I'll just rally KSU fan. He and I will do it. That way we get his thoughts. I don't need to drag you back into it and make you suffer over here. You can go have fun.
Gonna do a Sunday show. You guys fly out early.
It's only like 5 o'clock in the afternoon back in Kansas. So maybe he's watching this and just realized he's on the hook to do a little streaming with me later on tonight. But I don't know. We'll get it figured out. We've got a full week of shows coming for you this next week too, in the lead up to North Dakota and the home opener. It sucks, absolutely, no doubt about it. But there were at least encouraging things in some of the areas. We'll see how it looks, because the spots that need to get better are things that, as much as you don't want to admit it, are going to take time. Secondary and offensive line, a lot of new pieces with inexperience. They're going to get better as time goes on. I'm not going to go as far to say that I'm like really encouraged by what Avery Johnson and the receivers did today, but it was a step in the right direction based off of what we saw at times last year. And I know that some people are going to absolutely hate that too. So for Drew Galloway, I'm Mason Voth. Thanks for watching the KSO show. We are back again tomorrow, Sunday show, me and KSU fan. And then Monday, we'll start this whole thing up again. We've got reactions to Chris Kleiman's press conference that he will have to have on Monday. It'll probably be a little bit longer and more informative than what we got to see today, as they were kind of shooing the people out pretty quick, getting them through the ringer. And we've got all that to look forward to. So once again, Drew Galloway, I'm Mason Voth. Thanks for watching and listening to K-State Online.